This week is not going to be a normal week across the United States. And the reason I say that is because when you sit down and actually look at the data, when you pull up the models, when you analyze the pattern, what you are looking at is not one storm, it is not two storms. We are potentially dealing with 3 to 4 separate and distinct weather systems that are all going to be trying to cause serious problems across different parts of this country at the same time. And the part that nobody seems to be talking about yet, the timing of all of this could not be worse, because here is the scenario that concerns me the most. These systems are not arriving spread out over weeks. They are stacking. They are coming back to back. And when storms stack like this, the recovery time between events collapses. Emergency services, travel infrastructure, power grids, none of these things get a chance to reset before the next hit arrives. That is what makes this week genuinely different from a standard active weather pattern. So let's break this down properly. Let's go through what the data is actually showing us, region by region, system by system. And let's talk about where the most serious threats are going to materialize over the next several days. We're going to start in the south, because that is where the first and arguably most dangerous piece of this puzzle is already beginning to take shape. When you look at the large-scale atmospheric setup driving this week's weather, the core driver is a deep, amplified trough over the central part of the country. This is not a weak, flat wave. This is a pronounced dip in the jet stream that is drawing a significant surge of moisture northward out of the Gulf of Mexico, while simultaneously allowing a blast of cold Canadian air to push down from the north. The collision of these two air masses is what is going to spark the first major severe weather event of the week. The Storm Prediction Center is watching this closely, and when you look at the wind shear profiles across the Tennessee Valley and into the Ohio Valley, the numbers are not subtle. We are talking about a setup that checks multiple boxes simultaneously. Strong directional shear, strong speed shear, and the kind of low-level jet enhancement that tends to produce significant convective events even when the convective available potential energy is not particularly impressive. That is actually one of the things that makes this particular setup tricky to forecast. You do not need a high instability environment for tornadoes when you have this much shear in the atmosphere. The shear can do the work on its own. The question that the modeling community is wrestling with right now is, what does the convective mode look like? Do we get organized supercells capable of producing significant, potentially long-track tornadoes? Or do we get a faster-moving squall line that brings primarily damaging straight-line winds and brief spin-up tornadoes? Both scenarios are dangerous. Both scenarios are on the table. And the difference between those two outcomes can literally come down to whether the atmosphere manages to recover between rounds of convection. If you are in the zone, and right now, we are talking about a broad area encompassing portions of Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. The honest assessment is this: you need to have your severe weather plan finalized before this event begins. That means knowing where your safe interior room is. That means having multiple ways to receive warnings, including a weather radio if possible, because power outages can and do happen during events like this. And that means understanding that the primary window of concern is not just the afternoon hours. Depending on how the overnight heating and recovery plays out, this system could be producing severe weather well into the late evening hours and potentially into the overnight. That is when these events become most dangerous, because people are asleep and reaction time to warnings drops dramatically. Now, let's talk about the snowfall component of this same system, because these two things are happening simultaneously on opposite sides of the same frontal boundary. While the southern and southeastern portions of the country are dealing with the severe weather threat, the northern and northwestern portions of this system are going to be dragging down significant cold air and producing a winter weather event across the upper Midwest and potentially into the Great Lakes region. When you look at the temperature profiles across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and northern Michigan, you are looking at the kind of setup where surface temperatures are going to be cold enough to support snow and ice even at lower elevations. The snowfall totals in this first phase of the week's activity are not going to be the main story. We are talking about a general range of 4 to 8 inches across portions of Minnesota and Wisconsin, with higher totals possible in areas that get favorable wind and lake effect enhancement. But here is the thing. This is not the snowstorm that concerns me the most this week. This is the opening act, because when you push into the latter half of the week, the pattern does not relax. By what the models are showing, and I want to be careful here because there is still meaningful uncertainty in the long-range data, is that a second and more significant storm system is organizing in the Pacific and is on track to interact with a very favorable atmospheric setup over the central and eastern parts of the country. And unlike the first event, which is primarily a Midwest and Ohio Valley threat, this second system has the potential to produce impacts across a much broader geographic footprint. Let's talk about what the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts model and the Global Forecast System model are showing for this second event, because they are actually in fairly reasonable agreement on the large-scale pattern, which is notable because model agreement in the medium range is not always the case. Both models are indicating a deepening low-pressure system that tracks across the Central Plains and then lifts into the Ohio Valley and eventually toward the northeast. The exact track matters enormously when it comes to who gets what. And right now, there is still a real spread in the model guidance on that track. But the general scenario they are both pointing toward is a storm that brings severe weather to the south and southeast, a significant winter weather threat to portions of the Midwest and Great Lakes, and a heavy precipitation event, potentially mixed in some areas, to the northeast corridor. The severe weather aspect of this second system is the part I want to spend some time on, because the setup looks potentially more significant than the first event. Why? Because by the time this second system arrives, the atmosphere is going to have had a chance to recover and reload with moisture and instability. The Gulf moisture return in the models looks impressive. When you look at the dew point forecast for portions of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia ahead of this system, you are seeing values that are unusually high for this time of year. Dew points pushing into the mid to upper 50s in February are not something you see every week, and they are meaningful from a severe weather standpoint because they represent a much larger reservoir of energy for the atmosphere to work with. The wind shear profile for this second event also looks significant. The upper-level pattern supports a strong, progressive jet streak that will be moving across the region, and the positioning of that jet streak relative to the surface low is going to be a key factor in whether we see isolated supercell activity or a more linear convective mode. If we get the supercell scenario ahead of the main squall line, the tornado threat could be elevated. And when you look at the combination of enhanced Gulf moisture, strong wind shear, and a deepening surface low, the phrase significant severe weather outbreak starts to become a reasonable framework for the southern portion of this event. I want to be analytically honest about this, though. The models are not in perfect agreement on the intensity of this second system. There is a scenario where things come together more favorably for severe weather. And there is a scenario where some of the ingredients do not align as precisely and the event is more modest. What I can say with confidence is that the atmospheric pattern this week supports the potential for multiple rounds of severe weather across a broad area of the southern and eastern United States, and that residents in these areas should be monitoring the situation closely as the event timeline approaches. Now, for the winter weather component of the second system, the question everybody is going to be asking is whether the Northeast Corridor, and specifically cities like Philadelphia, New York City, and Boston, is going to see significant snowfall. Let me be straight with you about what the data is showing right now, because I think it is important to give you an accurate picture rather than either underselling or overselling this. The positioning of the storm track is going to be the determining factor. If this low tracks slightly farther north and closer to the coast than the models currently suggest, the Northeast Urban Corridor is in play for a meaningful snowfall event. If the track stays a bit farther south and inland, the primary precipitation type in the big cities could end up being rain, or at best a rain-to-snow changeover that limits accumulations significantly. Right now, the honest answer is that we are still working through the uncertainty on that track question. What I can say is that the storm has enough juice in it that if the track cooperates, significant snowfall totals are not off the table for coastal New England. For areas like interior New England, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine in particular, the snow threat looks more consistent across the guidance regardless of track, because these areas tend to get in on the colder air more reliably and are less sensitive to the minor track variations that make such a big difference for coastal cities. If you are in the interior Northeast, this is a storm worth watching carefully. There is also a coastal flooding component to this second system that deserves attention. When a deepening low-pressure system tracks up the coast with strong onshore flow, the potential for moderate to locally major coastal flooding increases significantly. The timing relative to the tidal cycle matters here, and depending on how the system evolves, and some coastal areas from the Delmarva Peninsula through New Jersey and into southern New England could be looking at a scenario where storm surge combines with high tide in a way that produces flooding impacts in low-lying areas. This is not a certainty. It depends heavily on the final track and intensity of the storm, but it is a scenario that needs to be in the conversation. Let me also address the temperature story this week because it ties everything together. The pattern this week is fundamentally a pattern of extreme contrast. While winter storms are hammering parts of the Midwest and Northeast, the opposite side of the country is going to be experiencing something very different. The western pattern features a strong ridge of high pressure that is going to push temperatures well above average across the desert southwest and eventually into the southern plains. We are talking about temperatures in the 80s in cities like Phoenix and Tucson, and temperatures in the upper 60s and lower 70s, pushing as far north as Dallas and Oklahoma City by the middle of the week. That temperature contrast, warm, moist air piling in from the Gulf on the southern side, cold Arctic air diving down from Canada on the northern side, is exactly what fuels these major storm systems. The greater the temperature gradient across the country, the more energy the atmosphere has to work with. And right now, that gradient is very sharp. That is one of the reasons the modeling community is taking the second system seriously, even though there is still uncertainty in the details. If you are trying to synthesize all of this into a coherent picture of what this week looks like across the country, here is the honest analytical summary. The first half of the week brings a severe weather threat to the Ohio Valley and Tennessee Valley, with a concurrent winter weather event across the upper Midwest. The second half of the week brings a potentially more significant storm system that could impact a broader area. Severe weather across the south and southeast, winter weather from the Great Lakes through interior New England, and a coastal storm threat for the mid-Atlantic and northeast. All of this is occurring while the western and central portions of the country enjoy unseasonably warm conditions that are, paradoxically, part of the reason these eastern storm systems are developing in the first place. The question I keep coming back to when I look at this pattern is whether the infrastructure in the impacted areas is adequately prepared for events of this magnitude arriving in rapid succession. We are not talking about one big storm that people can prepare for and recover from. We are talking about multiple events in a compressed time frame, and that changes the calculus for emergency preparedness, for travel decisions, for utility response, and for everything else that depends on stable weather conditions. If you are in any of the areas mentioned, from the Ohio Valley to the Tennessee Valley, from the upper Midwest to interior New England, from the coastal mid-Atlantic to the deep South, the time to think about your preparedness posture is right now. Have your emergency supplies in order. Know your plan for severe weather warnings. If you are in a coastal area, I understand your flood risk and know your evacuation route, and stay connected to the official forecasts from your local National Weather Service office. Because as these systems get closer and the uncertainty narrows, local forecasters are going to be your best source of specific, actionable guidance. This week is the kind of weather week that forecasters study for years afterward. Multiple significant systems, overlapping impacts, a sharp and dynamic atmospheric pattern. The data is telling a serious story. The only question is exactly how that story plays out, and we are going to be tracking every development every step of the way. And that is exactly why staying informed is not optional right now. It is necessary. The atmospheric pattern driving this week is the kind that catches people off guard, precisely because it moves fast and hits multiple regions at once. You now have the full analytical picture of what is coming and why it matters. The data does not lie, and this week the data is telling us to pay attention. Stay weather aware, keep your eyes on the official forecasts, and do not let the first quiet morning of the week fool you into thinking the serious weather is not on its way. If this breakdown helped you understand what is actually happening across the country this week, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to see this kind of analysis before these storms arrive. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. because this is the kind of week where you do not want to miss a single update. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you get every video the moment it drops. This channel does not do hype, it does data. And right now, the data is worth watching closely. Stay ready.